Hello and welcome to Biblical Receipts Podcast. Today we will be discussing the topic of tithing. Should members still be required to pay tithes? Should church leaders, pastors, popes, reverends, whatever title they're giving themselves these days, should they be allowed to receive a salary for their services? Many people think so. What do you think? Well, let's take a look and see how this arrangement began. Well, why did Jehovah God require Israel to pay tithes? Well, first, so that they could show in a tangible way their appreciation for Jehovah God's goodness. And second, so that they could contribute to the support of the Levites, who could then concentrate their obligations, including the teaching of the law. Now, let me stress, tithing is not required for Christians today. And we're going to show you that from the scriptures. Okay. Now, under the Mosaic law, a tenth of the produce of the land and a tenth of the increase of the herds and flocks were given to the Levites yearly to support them. Now, the Levites gave a tenth of this tenth to the Aaronic priesthood to support them. There were some additional tithes as well. Again, tithing, according to the scriptures, is not required for Christians today. Let's get into it right after this. All right, now the Bible tells of two instances prior to the setting up of the law covenant in which a tenth part of possessions was paid to God or to his representative. Now, the first of these was on the occasion when Abraham gave Melchizedek one tenth of the spoils of his victory over Chedorlaomer or Mer and his allies. Okay, now this can be found in at the scriptures here, Genesis 14:18, 14:19, and 14:20. For the sake of time, you can pause the video and read these for yourself. I just wanted to highlight these so you can go ahead and see the biblical reasons behind of the how tithing began and what tithing, is all about. So anyway, let's go ahead and keep it moving. Now, the second case concerning Jacob, who vowed at Bethel to give one tenth of his substance to God. Now, these two occasions, however, are merely instances of voluntary giving one tenth. There is no record to the effect that Abraham or Jacob commanded their descendants to follow such examples, thereby establishing a religious practice, custom, or a law. There is no mention of that. And here at Genesis chapter 28, 20, 21, and 22, like I said, I've got many different translations here underlined and arrowed where you can always pause the video and check these out for yourself. I'm not going to go ahead and read each one. I'm just showing you what the scriptures actually say. Okay? You do your own research and you come up with your own conclusion. That's on you. Now, Leviticus chapter 25, 1 through 12. What does it say? Well, now, regarding the Mosaic law that God gave the nation of Israel, it was for specific purposes, apparently involving two tenths of their annual income, except during the Sabbath years when no tithe was paid since no income was anticipated. And that's what these scriptures are saying here that I've highlighted. Now, we have the King James Version on the left and the New World Translation on the right. And I've got underlined there the main points that are being brought out in each translation. Okay, let's keep it moving. Numbers chapter 18, verse 26. Here we see that the Levites were to receive a tithe as an inheritance, a tenth of a tenth. The Levites were given no territorial allotment, Jehovah being their inheritance. So they didn't receive land like some others did because God was their inheritance. That's what these scriptures are bringing out that I have underlined and arrowed it. Now, Leviticus 27:30, we see that tithing originally involved giving what one produced from the earth. So in the beginning, money was not a thing mentioned as far as paying a tithe. You had to, if you grew produce or if you raised livestock, you were to give a tenth of those items. If you notice in the beginning, Cain and Abel, when they were bringing their contributions to God. Now you can read that account and look at and see the items that they brought. They didn't have cash, so one brought produce, one brought livestock. Now, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 31. Okay, did you know that back then you could actually redeem or uh, get back some of your tithes that you paid? Right. If you were feeling desperate in need, you could always go back and say, "Look, I'm gonna need to get a redeem some of my tithes." Yeah, that's right here in the scriptures. A lot of pastors won't mention that for obvious reasons. Okay, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 32. We see that tithing also involved giving of the herd and the flock. So we brought that out. We mentioned that already. Since no money was involved, you either grew vegetation or you grew livestock, one or the other. Now, Matthew chapter 10, verse 8. What are we seeing here in the New Testament, as they say, or the Christian Greek scriptures? Now, we see that Jesus is basically saying, I didn't charge you for my word. Don't charge anyone else. This is what Jesus is saying here in the scriptures here. Now, let's actually read. Let's go in the middle here in the classic translations. We see at the King James, what does it say? Jesus was telling them, it says, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give. Now, let's look at some of how the other translations worded it. Okay, let's go here to the in the modern translations here toward the bottom, where the Holman Christian Standard Bible. What does it say here? The third or fourth from the bottom. It says, "You have received free of charge, give free of charge." Now, going further down here, the Good News translation, we see it says, "You received without paying, so give without being paid." This is what Jesus is telling his disciples. Now, I gave you the word free. Don't go out there and be charging people for this. Don't. Now, you take that how you want to take it. The receipts don't lie. Now, Romans chapter 6, verse 14. What do we have here? We see that Paul is saying that Christians no longer have to pay a tenth as the Mosaic law required. What is Paul saying here? Again, let's go to the classic translations, King James. It says, "For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace." So what he's saying here is that paying tithes or tithing was a part of the law that was given by Moses to the Israelites. It was a part of that law. It was a law back then. But we're going to see how when Christ came on the scene, as 1 Corinthians 9:14 says, he's the end of the law. But anyway, it says many church leaders have used this scripture to attempt to justify themselves earning a salary from the church. How they are grossly mistaken. It very basically means that practice what you preach. That's what this is saying. Like, for instance, let me read the King James again. That's what most people read. It says, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." And it basically means, hey, practice what you preach. That's what it means. It don't mean you should get paid. So John chapter 4, verse 34 says, this scripture shows that Jesus was fed spiritually. That was his reward. See, again, King James in the middle. And you can read any of these translations. You can stop the video and just read to your heart's content. Okay, Jesus said unto them, my meat or my food is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. See, Jesus felt that his pay was just simply serving his Father. That's how he felt. That was his reward, not getting paid by whoever he spreads the gospel to. Now, Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, what does it say? This scripture shows that Jesus was fed spiritually. That was his reward. Again, it says, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Okay? Colossians chapter 2, verse 13, at uh, we see that at Jesus' death, the written law of having to pay tithes died with him or ended. That's what this scripture is saying. In the classic translations, again, the King James in the middle, at the very top, it says, blotting out the handwritten of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Basically, that once he died, he abolished the old law. So we're no longer under the law, we're under the law of the Christ. That's what the scripture is bringing out. In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12, we had a change in the priesthood from imperfect human priest to a perfect heavenly priest in Jesus Christ. That's what the scripture is bringing out. He says, for the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, it says, our contributions and donations, etc., are done voluntarily from the heart. Now, for instance, at our kingdom halls, no salaries ever paid to anyone. There's no collections taken ever. You won't see, you'd be hard pressed to come in and find out where donations are being, or where you place donations. Nothing is passed around. So you literally have to ask somebody, where would you, if you wanted to donate or contribute, where would you do that? So you don't have to worry about being hustled at the Kingdom Hall. And like I said, no one gets paid a salary. Everybody is a volunteer. Everyone from top to bottom, contrary to what you may think or what you may have heard. Okay? Now, what does the King James says? Every man according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. So it's basically what we give from the heart. That's what God sees. Okay? That's why Jesus gave the example of the elderly widow who dropped in 2 small coins of very little value. Now, Acts chapter 18, verse 3, what does it say? Now, we clearly see by the scriptures that Paul worked. Paul had a job, y'all. He worked. Okay? Uh, He did not earn a salary from his ministry. He lived with the fellow disciples and not in a luxurious home like we see today. Okay. Now, what does the scripture say? Let's go to the New King James Version. It says, so because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked. For by occupation they were tent makers. So Paul had a career. He had a job. Okay. They weren't making it rain for Paul or the other disciples back in those days, like people are doing for the pastors today. Just saying. Always, you can stop the video, look at any translation you want, and hey, it is what it is. The receipts don't lie. Acts chapter 20, verse 34 says, he worked with his hands, supplying his own needs. Okay. Now, what translation do we want to focus on? Let's see. Let's go to the Holman Christian Standard on the far left, modern translation toward the bottom. It says, you yourselves know that these hands have provided for my needs and for those who were with me. Yeah, he worked using his hands. He wasn't milking or fleecing the flock, as they say, like we see today. So I hope these scriptures were of benefit. You can always go back and review it with your own personal copy of the Bible, whatever translation that happens to be. Like I said, the receipts are right there in front of you. Do with them whatever you wish. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you haven't done so already, I would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell notification because I try to drop these at least once or twice a week. And I will see you when I see you.